Hello and welcome back to this damn fool idealistic crusade. This will be a review of the Warner Archive Blu-ray release of the 1950 film Chain Lightning, which is written off usually as just another Bogart vehicle, but it is actually important for a number of reasons. It was directed by Stuart Heisler, again came out in 1950, just after he and Bogart had teamed together the previous year in the underrated Tokyo Joe for Columbia and Santana, which was Bogart's independent production company. What's important about this in terms of Bogart's career is this was actually the last film on his Warner Brothers contract. So there's a sense of it being sort of the end of an era, but it does pick up on some things that they had that he and Heisler had done on Tokyo Joe, most especially the fact that it's a black and white drama with an aviation background, just as Tokyo Joe had, but here the aviation aspect takes center stage. The other thing it has in common with Bogie's Warner Brothers career is the fact that even though it's 1950, it does have the air of some of his World War II patriotic or propaganda vehicles, or at least where that was inherent in the fact that it was a war film, even though it was a Warner drama. So this does have a little bit of the flavor of things like Action in the North Atlantic, where you have Bogie as a serviceman. This you get most in terms of the feeling of it in the actual World War II sequences, which is told in a flashback style. I think the biggest issue with the film as it stands is it doesn't just get that out of the way at first. It uses the World War II background to the characters and the sort of love triangle that develops as a flashback. We open with a test sequence done in the post-war modern day of the film, 1950 era, and then we flash back to the Bogie character's back history as a combat pilot and his criticism of the design of the planes and bombers and how that goes into direct contrast with the designer of the planes who's there for field tests, who becomes his love rival later on, played by Richard Worf, the object of their affection, who is played by Eleanor Parker, and she essentially pops up again in the post-war sequences, and all of these old feelings come to the surface, where essentially she was cast aside by the Bogart character in bits of self-doubt and self-shame in the past. And so having a Bogart vehicle with a sort of old flame returning, you do have that Casablanca vibe that seems very much inherent, and also a very easy thing to do in a Bogart vehicle. It feels right, and Bogie can play the literal hell out of it. So you get the idea where the film is going pretty quickly. It's just a little clunky in the opening how they do that sort of flashback sequence. Again, I think it would have been much better to just open with that instead of the opening beat of the test flight sequence that actually is from the climax of the film. But it does give you that idea that the Bogart character is somebody who doesn't always necessarily play by the rules and has his own personal code that he's going to live by, or at least struggle with in terms of how to live with himself and his decisions he will make, which again is tried and true Bogart material. And it fits that this was the final film on his Warner Brothers contract, because there are a lot of the key themes that you see that are strengths in many Bogart classics that pop up here in new formulations. So again, it's a fitting idea that this is the sort of final note in his legendary Warner Brothers group of films from the contract. Again, this was the last film on that original contract, going all the way back to The Petrified Forest in 1936. So there was quite a bit of history there. Of course, these characters find themselves in the post-war period reunited of sorts under the auspices of a airplane manufacturer, a civilian manufacturer, played by Raymond Massey, with a sort of lust for greed and not necessarily caring about what the costs would be to the actual people involved. But he plays the role with such enthusiasm that you can't help but kind of like the guy, even though he is a bit unscrupulous here and there, shall we say. So it's also interesting to see that the love triangle actually stays rather subdued. You don't have people actively trying to sabotage each other. There are no punch-ups or fisticuffs or anything. So there is an interesting element of at least pretty much all the people involved are behaving more like adults, and there is a greater sense of dramatic weight given in all the performances. It's not necessarily there in the story. The script, and particularly the romance department, does feel underbaked. It is necessary that we have the back history and the World War II sequences set in London, but It is a little clunky in the way that it's laid out, because we start in the present day and then we jump back into that and then we jump back into the present day, and there was really no need for that. Again, it would have been better if they just opened normally with the war sequences and then jump into the post-war present. And in some ways it sounds like I'm talking about Tokyo Joe again, which again is another film, same director, same star, same director-star pairing, that with an aviation background, where the script isn't the strongest. There are some Casablanca elements sort of floating around and some Bogart vehicle tropes. But as with that film, I think Chain Lightning actually rises above its script and the inherent weaknesses that it carries. And I think that's entirely due to the strength of Heisler's direction and the strength of the performances, particularly the lead performances. You'll see this film and you would think, a star might sleepwalk or just go through the motions, particularly since it was the last film on the Warner contract, and he and Bogart and Jack Warner had not seen eye to eye, shall we say, for an extremely long time, and their relations had broken down to a very low point, particularly here at the end of the contract, when he had already been doing independent productions and working in other studios. So you would think that somebody might just walk their way through this, but Bogart does not. In fact, it seems like he's giving it everything he's got. He's giving it 200%. It's a fantastic Bogart performance, especially for fans who really can look at and pay attention and look at deep nuances of his performance and compare it to other films of this time period and even before. So Bogart was not the type of actor to ever really sleepwalk his way through a role, and he's really giving it 200% in this film. And I think he's really matched by Eleanor Parker, who doesn't necessarily have the most material to work with, but I think the most effective scenes outside of the actual air sequences, where they get really dramatic and you have all of the aerial footage mixed in with the studio footage, the best scenes in terms of the dramatic ones outside of those are actually the scenes between Bogart and Parker, and the getting at the more romantic melodrama scenes. It's not really the dialogue they're even saying, it's the strength of their performances, the silence between the words, their exchanged glances, the sort of repressed emotions that keep coming to surface here and there. And I've always find that fascinating what Bogart does with scenes like that. So I think the film is actually quite rewarding in those terms. And for it being just a Warner programmer and being sort of mixed in with these films of Bogart's career at Columbia, the last few at Warner Brothers in the late 40s, early 50s, I think it remains quite strong, and it still holds up rather well today. And I think that is entirely due, again, to the strength of the direction and the lead performances. It's topped off by mixing in all of the real aerial footage and actually getting Bogart in these rather realistic mock-ups of planes. You actually see jets taking off. You see the sort of, at the time, more current preparations in the early versions of Air Mass, and then in the post-war sequences when he's flying the experimental test planes, actually getting into pressure suits and things that are being worked on, and also making it feel lived in by, getting in these rigs and then cracking jokes and things. So it has a nice lived-in quality as well, so it doesn't get too much like a propaganda piece where, okay, this is how it is and there's no humor and everything's perfect because it's the 50s and everything has to do this to get government cooperation and things like that. It has been said for real aircraft buffs that there are, it's at least relatively realistic. Obviously they're having to tow planes around with the actors in it, and then you have the studio footage of them inside the mock-up on a process stage, but it's really well edited and cut together. You can't really spot the seams unless you're really looking for them, and it's really well it's really well put together. It was actually shot by Ernest Haller, the cinematographer who also shot things like Gone with the Wind and Mildred Pierce, and even in this same year he shot the beautiful Technicolor just absolute classic The Flame and the Arrow. This film looks quite incredible in addition to all of this stuff. So I think there are many reasons to recommend this picture, even though it is not regarded as a top-tier Bogart vehicle. And it also has that special place for it being the very last Bogey Warner Brothers contract film. And there is a sort of element of finality to it in that. And particularly when you get to the ending, it has a sort of final clinch, not unlike what you'd see in a Bogart and Bacall film, particularly The Big Sleep, for example. So it has some elements of a Bogart Warner Brothers classic, and it's a nice fitting sort of final film, even though it's more of a standard programmer. And again, I think it's really sold by, again, the lovely photography, the execution of the aerial sequences, which is really well done, the actual heightening of the drama in this, particularly in the main test flight. It is a little clunky in its opening and closing in terms of how the script is worked out and how the sequences are kind of laid around. It probably would have been a little bit better had the main test flight that the Bogart character risks his life to do actually been the main focus, because pretty much after that, once that ends, the film kind of seems like it goes into a sort of postscript section, particularly when it then repeats what we saw in the opening that got cut off for the flashback. So structurally, I think it is a little clunky, but I do really think there are really some fantastic elements in it, and it's topped off by the really great lead performances. So I do really recommend this for all Bogart fans and really fans of classic Hollywood and Warner in general. It's sort of a really strong 40s programmer that they were still making at this time in the early 50s. And it's topped off by, again, the aerial sequences being rather well executed and really beautiful photography by Ernest Haller. Now we come to Warner Archive's 2021 Blu-ray, here with lovely original poster artwork. This is in their usual style, no frills, but lovely original art. And they don't ever credit what the transfers are on here, but this one was a complete surprise, first of all, that it was even announced for Blu-ray, this being a lesser-known, lesser-regarded, later Bogart vehicle. But this also received a brand new 4K scan, I believe, from Original Negative Elements. And oh boy, is this thing absolutely gorgeous. So don't ever let the simplicity of the Warner Archive packaging fool you, and especially at the frequently cheap price this goes for. It is an absolute stunner. There is the disc art, repeating the poster art. Now, in terms of the picture transfer, again, this is a 4K scan from Original Elements. It looks absolutely gorgeous throughout. You'll frequently find yourself just stopping and marveling at how beautiful the transfer is. There are one or two very minor bits that I noticed. These seemed to be tied into the Original Elements. You will notice a very tiny, minute bit of frame weave in the opening and closing titles, like literally right as the Warner shield comes up and you get the opening titles. There's just like the tiniest amount of weave that seems natural, and it's also in the very end credit titles as well, but it's very minor, and again seems to be inherent to the source. There's also another spot very close to the opening of the film in the actual World War II flashback sequences where the characters are about to go into a nightclub, and it looks like maybe it's some dupe material that was part of the original source, where just for one brief moment as they're going in, it gets really dark as they're going into a darkened doorway because it's in London during the war raids and things. And again, it seems like it's from a dupe or lesser source or something. But again, that's just inherent to the source. And it's not bad or anything. It's just noticeable because the rest of the transfer is so beautiful from this element they were using. Some other reviewers have noticed that there is a very little bit of banding here and there. I didn't really notice too much of that, but the disc itself is mastered to the usual very high Warner Archive bit rate. It is frequently a disc you're going to literally pause and just marvel at how beautiful it looks. And ironically, this film on Blu-ray now is one of the absolute best looking Bogart titles available on home video. So this actually has a better transfer than a lot of the big name, really iconic titles, particularly ones handled by the main studio division like The Maltese Falcon and Treasure of the Sierra Madre, done years ago on Blu-ray. So those are, outdated and need, 4K releases for sure. But this now has one of the best looking presentations of any Bogart title on home video. In fact, I'd actually put this up there, with the reissue of Casablanca from the 4K scan and the Sony 4K restoration of The Harder They Fall from the Indicator box set. So it's right up there among the best looking Bogart titles. And at the low price this goes for, frequently it goes on sale. It's just an absolute must buy for the picture quality alone and the new scan. In terms of the audio, it is lossless mono, DTS, HDMA. So I don't own a previous release of this, so I can't make my direct audio comparisons. This did have a previous archive DVD release, which was pretty much bare bones, and probably was based off of the Laserdisc release, which I had forgotten about. But this actually got a late release Laserdisc from MGM UA. It had gotten a VHS release early in the 90s. It got a late release Laserdisc, probably from the same master, and then that probably got ported over to the Warner Archive DVD. But again, those are all old standard def master scans. This is a brand new 4K scan done in-house at Warner MPI from original materials, and the audio does sound excellent. I didn't notice any real problems, and it sounds quite robust throughout. So again, I just that's all I can say, because this is the only version I have to refer to, but there are at least a couple previous releases of this. And that's pretty much all that exists for this title, because again, it is a lesser known and discussed Bogart vehicle. We do actually get some extras. This includes the Looney Tunes short Bare Feet, which is a really funny and wonderful Looney Tunes short, but then I could say that about all of them. It is in HD, presumably from a new scan and restoration. It does have window boxed credits, but the actual short is not window boxed, but it looks wonderful, and it is included in full HD. Then also included is one of the classic Joe McDote shorts, So You Want to Be an Actor, that was part of a series, and these have been used as a lot of DVD extras on Warner Brothers releases of the various ones in these. So you've probably seen these before on other Warner titles, or they sometimes run them still on TCM. That is still in standard def, so that is not in HD, because I don't think those have been scanned in HD. And then not listed on the actual cover, but included, is the film's original trailer, which is fascinating because it is done from a brand new HD scan and looks absolutely gorgeous. This is something Warner Archive does, I think, when it's possible, or when they have a good trailer to scan. If you're like me and love seeing vintage advertising materials in high quality, which rarely happens, it's a real treat. It's something that very few studios or labels actually do. It does take time. It takes a little bit of extra money and time to do, and then to make sure it looks good. It looks stunning. And of course, frequently trailers can have bits of films that were not used, or deleted scenes, deleted materials, or at the very least give you a alternate sort of idea of what an original print might have looked like. You know, if they had scanned an actual reel of a release print of Chain Lightning, it would probably look quite close to the restored HD footage you see in the trailer, as opposed to the negative materials scan in the main transfer. But that was a real treat. Again, it's not listed on the back, which it should be, but it's not just some old standard def trailer recycled. It's actually available in HD. So overall, I think this is a phenomenal Warner Archive release. It is frequently on sale at various online retailers. Sometimes it drops to around $10 or so. For the scan alone, for the picture transfer alone, it's worth $20 or more. It's an absolutely stunning looking title. It's beautifully shot. Even if the film may not strike the right notes for everybody, it's essential for all Bogart fans. It gives an incredible performance, again, giving it everything he's got, as he always did. So it's a must for Bogart fans. It's a must for Warner fans and Warner Archive fans. But it's also, again, one of the Warner Archive titles that is a brand new 4K scan of original materials. The only real downside is apparently Craig Barron and Ben Burt, the wonderful pairing of experts who do all kinds of extras and documentaries for a lot of releases now. Ben Burt is a legend in his own right, but they did a piece on Chain Lightning and the aerial sequences and the sound design and things. Apparently that was done for HBO Max as part of the online TCM festival during COVID, and it's one of their lengthy pieces, like 20 or 30 minutes, that could easily have gone on a disc. So it's really unfortunate that's not on here, because I've not seen that, and I would now really love to see it. I didn't even know it existed, actually, until reading some reference to it. So that would have been a no-brainer to include here. But I don't know if maybe there's some sort of rights issues or something, or they would have had to pay for extra clearances to include it, or it just might be oversight. I don't know. But that would have made this an even more recommendable release. But that's really, I think, my only major the only major quibble I might have about this, other than maybe a little bit of banding poking in the transfer here and there fleetingly. But outside of that, this is another absolutely stunning release from Warner Archive. It is dirt cheap. There's no reason to not pick up a copy of this, even if you're just somewhat interested, because it will be a film I think people will return to at least several times over the years, and it does grow on you more. I had seen this once before, and I really enjoyed it more the second time around. And of course, I really enjoyed what Heisler and Bogart did on Tokyo Joe the previous year, so I found a lot to enjoy in this. In fact, when you see it today, I think it's impossible to not think of Top Gun Maverick, which does have a lot of similar themes. And to be honest, this does it better, even though it does have some clunkiness and some script issues and things. It does it better. I'll go ahead and say that. Yeah. If you've seen Top Gun Maverick and then you see this, I think it's impossible to not find at least some of the shared common themes. And of course, it's similar subject matter, and there's a sort of romance subplot. So it's obviously going to reflect on the other film. But I kept being reminded of that seeing this again, and then all of a sudden thinking, oh, that's actually really similar. Okay, okay, that's very similar. So that's another reason why I think it's nice to have this now, since that Top Gun Maverick is very much on people's minds, even still in 2022. So that's why I think this is another beautiful release from the Warner Archive. The picture scan and transfer alone makes it a must-own, and at the cheap price it has, with an original trailer presented in beautiful-looking HD, plus an HD presentation of a classic Looney Tunes short, I think it's another must-own title, even if it is more on the obscure side. So that's it for this particular review. I hope this has been at least fun and somewhat informative to hear me once again babble on about classic films. I do really love the work that the Warner Archive does, as it should be obvious from all the videos I do on their releases, but they are really one of the best labels in existence doing this work, and their work far outshines the studio label every single time. So I do really try to support their work whenever possible. I encourage everyone else to do so, and the low prices that are frequently found on Warner Archive titles really do help. We cinephiles are not made of money, so there are so many titles and discs from labels that I try to support, but you just can't afford all of them. But when you have beautiful work like this, that's even if they are no frills editions, usually it's a part of the gigantic Warner Media conglomerate that is really doing the absolute best work that they can with new scans and really doing things properly. And again, the lower price points, the affordability factor really does help, and it is very much appreciated, particularly by my wallet. So again, I do encourage people to check this out if interested, and to, as always, keep supporting disc labels, boutique labels, studio labels by buying physical media and supporting incredible restoration work like this. And as always, keep your disc spinning to help keep physical media alive. And thanks ever so much for watching.